Good morning, my name's Simon. I live in Japan and I'm terrified this morning. I'm terrified for two reasons. First, I feel very much like an outsider here. I don't have any background in typesetting, typography. I didn't even study at Reading. I studied Japanese. I then worked as a computer programmer. I retrained as a missionary. I've been living in... I've been living in Japan for the past 7 years, and so I don't kind of have the same background as you guys. This is not my world. Because of that, I may say things which are really interesting and really exciting to me, but you guys completely know it all along. I may say things which are totally wrong. But please bear with me, because I promise that if you do, I will give you some software that you will really enjoy using. Yesterday we had the first two talks by Gerard Unger and Vaibhav Singh, which were about the impact of missionaries in type design. At least that's what I think they were about. And so that helped me to feel at ease. The second reason why I'm terrified this morning is because I'm describing something which is not a finished product by any means. It's very much a work in progress, but it is in very rapid development. Much more rapid development than the slides are in some cases. So what am I doing here if I'm not a typographer, not a typesetter? Well, actually, as a missionary, one of the things that I do in my copious free time is I run a publishing company. You know, the way that people do. And I publish some popular level books, but also an academic range. Now, an academic range of books, the titles, the covers, they don't need to look pretty. You know, a simple cover is fine, but as you know, every single title needs to be designed specifically for the trim size, for the spine width, all of these things. And it's yours. and as a computer programmer, this made no sense to me. Every time I designed a book, I had to fire up Illustrator and start again with a new template. And the data was basically the same. So I wrote a program to automate the layout of book covers. And at the back of the cover, we need a blurb. And I had some software which would justify a piece of text, put it on the back of the cover, and I shipped it off to the printer. And I was very, very happy. And it came back from the printer, and it looked like this. Yeah, I had to freak out a room full of type designers. This is not how we do justification. If I had been a sensible person, at that time I would have said, you know, forget it, let's just go back to Illustrator, do it the easy way. But, you know, people who are sensible people don't become computer programmers, and people who are sensible people don't become missionaries. So I decided to attack the problem. And I went on the lookout for better justification algorithms, hyphenation algorithms, and I added them into this code. And eventually it produced a cover that didn't look like this anymore, that looked like this, and I was very happy. And then I had a thought. And I have to live with the consequences of this thought every day. The thought went like this. I have a computer program which takes some textual input and it hyphenates it and it justifies it and it produces a PDF. And all I have to do really is add something like a page-breaking algorithm, and I've got a typesetting system. I mean, how hard can it be? About this time, I met a man called Martin Hoskin. He works for SILE, and we were having coffee together, and he was telling me about some of the difficulties he was having with Bible typesetting. Bible typesetting is, as I understand it, quite a specialist system. I was saying, do you use TeX? Do you use XE? Well, they wrote XE-TeX. And he said, we would dearly love to use TeX for the Bible typesetting. But there are these various challenges. You have to do typesetting on a grid. You have to do some complex layouts, none of which tech can do particularly well. You have to balance the columns. You may have material at the bottom of the page that you can't move, so you have to do balance columns by looking back over previous pages and adjusting the spaces, and tech just can't do that at all. And it gets worse, because when you're dealing with multiple languages, you have to do all of this synchronized between two languages on a page. Or sometimes you have to do it synchronized in two languages across a spread. And he was just sort of telling me all this horrible stuff. And I realized, gosh, there actually is room for a new typesetting system. So I'm going to show you how to use it. Later on we'll talk about the more interesting stuff, the multilingual aspects of it. But basically how you use it, the input, if you use tech, this should be very familiar to you. That's not very clear, I'm sorry. But the input is a plain text file, or a series of plain text files, which have within them some commands which begin with backslashes. You can see here, some of these commands are built into the system, like EM for emphasis. You also have a class, which is essentially your book design. So in this instance, I'm using a very simple class called book, which is the most simple book design there is. And that also is an avenue of extending SILE, and that produces the footnote support. Additionally, you can load in external packages, which are pieces of computer code. I've loaded in one here for bibtext, bibliography support, and that defines its own commands. It defines the load bibliography, it defines the citation and reference commands. So you prepare a text file like this. You then run it on the command line, and it produces a PDF like this. Again, if you've used tech, this shouldn't be a surprise at all. I'll show you one other example. I'm going to show you an example of a Bible in the Matig-Salug language of the Philippines. Normally, when you're doing document processing, you're not writing this kind of stuff from scratch. You either have this in a database or in an XML file or already prepared somewhere else. So this is an XML file that I got from the Bible translators, coming straight out of their software. So not a SILE file at all, and it defines a number of tags, various paragraph styles, various character styles. And then what we do is we create another file which tells SILE what those tags mean. So paragraph MT1 starts with no indent, and here's the font, and it's centered, and then we do whatever was within that tag. Let's run this as an example. So those are the files. We say we're using the USX class, and then we give it the USX file that we got from the Bible translators. Again, not a SILE file. Off we go, and it starts to typeset various pages. I'm just going to stop it there, because it's a long document. And that comes up on the other screen. There it is, Book of Genesis. So that's how you use it. Let's go back now and think some more about the multilingual support. I said I retrained as a missionary. When I was a missionary, I was writing my college papers in English, Japanese, Hebrew, and Greek. And so if I'm going to write my own typesetting system, it's got to get this kind of stuff right. Does anyone know, can anyone tell me the most complex writing system on the planet? I don't think this is an offensive question, because the people who use it would agree with me. No? Has anyone heard of Sutton sign writing? It's a system for visually representing signed languages. And it's a nightmare. We haven't quite worked out the best way how to represent this to computers yet. But when we do, SILE will support it. So I'm going to take you through some of the challenges of multilingual typesetting, starting with the input text and then building that up all the way to creating a page. Again, some of this I'm sure you know. We have an input text here which consists of the Arabic letter he 3 times. Arabic, of course, being a right-to-left script, just to keep you on your toes. This is the same letter, the same Unicode code point, the same font, but of course you would never see it like this in a document, because Arabic has initial, medial, final forms. So something somewhere has to take that text input and make those substitutions, do the shaping to find the correct glyphs from the font, put them together from the text. What you may not know is that as well as it being contextual within the word, it's also contextual based on the language that you're using. Different languages using the same script, same font, same Unicode code points have different expectations about which glyphs should be used. Is this really obvious to everybody? No, good, okay. So if you're writing in the Sindhi language, Arabic script, same font, same characters, should appear like that. That's the cultural expectation, language expectation for that set of glyphs. Similarly, in Urdu, it should look completely different again. I wanted to do an example in InDesign. I couldn't find InDesign support for Urdu, but I did find an article on the Adobe blog about how to add it. Says you have to open a specially crafted INX file, which won't give you spelling or hyphenation, but it will give you the open type lookups, which is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So that's good. Open a custom INX file. It'll only be available in this document, and it will go away as soon as you close it. So that's not great. Could you raise your hand if you know how to specially craft an INX file for InDesign to do open type specific lookups? That's 5 people out of a room of non-Latin script experts. So basically it's not very easy. That's InDesign. I'm not trying to rag on InDesign, to be honest, but in SILE things are so much easier. Let's take the example of Serbian here. It's so much easier because SILE doesn't have any support for Serbian whatsoever. Actually, I wrote that and then I went and had a look in the repository and somebody has contributed the hyphenation dictionary for Serbian, so that's quite nice. So if I do this in SILE, actually it gives me the right answer. How does it do that? Well, the answer is because it is asking a library called HalfBuzz. HalfBuzz is a shaping engine that knows about this kind of stuff. It can look into your font. You tell it the text, the script, the language, the font, the direction, and it works out the right glyphs for you. So in a lot of ways, SILE is very, very stupid because it's actually depending on some code which is very, very clever, which I didn't write. Just want to take a brief intermission. Somebody asked me, what about if we're dealing with very, very complex scripts and you need to access open type features directly? Well, you can do that. You can add a feature string to your font command, and there's also a package which will make that a little bit easier for you. Let's move on to a different language. I chose Javanese as an interesting language because Javanese has some really beautiful features. It has these composed, stacked consonants. And again, I'm not trying to make fun of InDesign, but I dumped some Javanese text into there, and I didn't see these stacked consonants, which was a big shame. The leading was a bit funny, and the line breaks are not great either. And then I tried it in the most recent release of SILE. Again, this knows nothing about Javanese. But Because it uses half buzz and half buzz uses a library called Graphite, you automatically get support for these lovely stacked consonants. It manages to get the leading right as well, which is pretty. But the line breaks are still a bit of a mess. In fact, in this line here, we haven't found any line breaks at all, and it runs off the end of the frame. So that's no good, and I did a little bit of work on it. I still didn't add anything specific for Javanese, but I added support for the Unicode line breaking algorithm. So in the Unicode standard, there's a character database, and each of the characters has got some information about it. You can break the line after this character, you can't break the line after this character, this kind of thing. So I used that information to find a few more line breaks. So that looks a little bit better. And then I woke up early one morning, it was a few weeks ago, I woke up at about 5 o'clock. I thought, well, the Granshan conference is coming up. I'm speaking about SILE and how it's this fantastic global typesetting system. And I'm going to be talking about how it doesn't have support for Javanese. So that's not so good. I wonder how difficult it would be to add it. And because there were not any Javanese speakers around at 5 o'clock in the morning, I did the next best thing. I turned to the Unicode standard. And I had a look at what it said about Javanese. It said that you can break the lines after every syllable. There's no hyphens. That's the kind of thing that people like me need to know. Okay, so what's a syllable? And it gives me some information about how to represent the syllable within the Unicode characters. So I took that information and I converted it into a piece of Lua code. Lua is a fairly simple computer programming language. This is the core of what I wrote that morning. And hopefully you can see the isomorphism here between this description of the syllable, consonant, here, there must be a consonant here, you've got medial ra, you've got medial ya, which are optional, and so on. So there's an isomorphism there, hopefully, between the description and the code. And this is one of the ways that you can extend SILE. You can say, here's some information about how to process a language, drop it in, and suddenly it knows about Javanese. And we process the same file, and now it looks like this, which I think, I don't know anything about Javanese, but I think it looks better anyway. Moving up, so we've dealt with assembling glyphs and assembling lines. Moving up to beyond type design to typesetting, there are language-specific conventions about how you do typesetting. And so a global typesetter needs to know these conventions and understand these conventions. A very simple example, Japanese. How do you break lines in Japanese? One of the things you can't do is just treat it like Latin and wait for the space to come along, because the space is not going to come along, it's going to go off the edge of the frame, it's going to look ridiculous. Nor can you just say, oh well, we'll break after anything. Because Japanese has particular conventions, you cannot start a line with a comma. You can't end a line with an open brace, things like that, open quote sign. It also has specific conventions for how to kern characters and the spacing between particular characters. I guess theoretically this could be done at the open type level, but it's not. It's done at the typesetting level. And so you need to tell your typesetting system about all of these conventions for each of the languages that you want to work in. This is the output of SILE because I've told it those conventions for Japanese, and it nicely kerns the two punctuation characters together. Bobby said, well, why is this better from TeX? Well, TeX can kind of do this, but for Japanese you need a specific Japanese version of TeX that knows these conventions, and if you're mixing scripts, then that's not going to work. Shifting languages again, let's go to Arabic. Again, a language that I can't read. being a dummy, I was doing some Arabic examples because right to left languages have their own challenges for a typesetter. And I thought, well, does it use hyphens? No, it doesn't actually use hyphens. There are various different ways of doing justification in Arabic. One of the ways is to stretch the letters, the qashida, to insert these long qashidas like you see there. Another way is to improve the layout of a line by choosing different ligatures, and there are various levels of ligatures that you can choose to improve the fit of the line. At this point, I realized that I don't know enough to make this work in SILE, so I'm not even going to try. It is very hard to debug scripts that you can't actually read. My wife caught me groaning at the screen one morning. What's wrong? But somebody's submitted a bug report to SILE, and now I have to learn Urdu. So I'm not even going to try. But what I have done is implemented something that hopefully somebody else can come along and take. And what I've implemented, I've grandiosely called Gutenberg mode. The idea behind this is that you can give a selection of alternate texts to the typesetter. You can say, I want you to put in the line either this or this or this or this, whatever you feel makes the line fit best. And so in this case, I've taken this text and I've given it a bit of freedom, and the algorithm has decided that it wants to apply the double L ligature in these fonts, which is not turned on by default. It thinks that having a double L ligature improves the fit of the line there. It also thinks that using ampersands instead of the word and improves the fit of the line. And so I've given it the freedom to do that. And hopefully that will give you the building blocks to do these kind of Arabic justifications. Moving up another level again, we've got lines into paragraphs, into pages. And again, each language has got their own conventions for book design and page layout. In Japanese, again, I live in Japan, so this has to work. Japanese, I'm very, very lucky because there is an industrial standard for typographic design in Japan. GIS standard 4051 is very detailed and tells me how to lay out Japanese text into books, which is incredibly useful. SILE has almost complete conformance with this standard. The one thing it doesn't quite do yet is the ruby, the furigana text, which goes in between the lines and explains the reading of some of the characters. The GIS standard is beautifully detailed. It tells you all the spacing requirements between characters and all the kerning that you need to do in such a way that it's actually very easy to turn that into Lua code. You can see that if the character class is a hyphen or a dividing punctuation mark, then the character after is a closing bracket, and then you insert this space and so on. It's very easy to turn that into something that SILE can understand. And also, your languages will have conventions for running heads, for page layout, all this kind of thing. And so you need to have a base language for each document. And very often that will need its own specific document class. Where things get very interesting, I think, especially for you guys, is where we start mixing texts and mixing scripts. But, on the other hand, if you have glyph selection done for each language, if you have line breaking done for each language, and if each piece of text knows which language it belongs to, then this is actually fairly easy. You start with a piece of text, you use the conventions of that language, and then you move on to the next piece of text. No problem. John Hudson last night said something about if we had explicit markup for all of the Indic languages we were using, then we could do this kind of thing, but it was very, it wasn't kind of predictable to do that. So they used two different fonts rather than using open type shaping for particular languages. One thing I want to do in SILE in the future is implement the Unicode script detection, so that you can say, this document will consist of these particular languages, and when I change to a different script, I want you automatically to change to a different set of processing expectations. But we haven't done that yet. So putting together multilingual text like that, again this is SILE output, is not particularly difficult, except for one thing. Can anyone spot the bug? What's that? Oh, bother. That wasn't the one I was hoping you would say. Talk to me about Bengali afterwards. What I was hoping you would say is that the Hebrew is right to left, but the line breaking has gone wrong. So if that was one long line, that would all be fine. But when you break right to left text within left to right text, you have to make sure that the reading order is correct. This is hovercraft. So that needs to appear on the first line, otherwise you're reading out of order. So that's a bug. Mind you, I did say that SILE was under rapid development, and I had some time after breakfast yesterday, and now it does that, so I'm quite happy about that. But mixing directionality is an interesting topic. What happens if we have left to right within a right to left majority document? Most of the time it's okay, because what we do in SILE is we apply the bidirectional algorithm. There is a set standard in Unicode for dealing with bidirectional text. Again, I'm sure you all know this, but let's go through it anyway. If I have some text which is written in logical order, you know, the order I will hit the keys on the keyboard, it gets stored like this, but we don't want it to be produced like this. We don't want it to be typeset like this. So it needs to be regrouped. And the BIDI algorithm goes along and it assigns orders to each of the letters, which means you can then swap it, and then when you typeset it, it all comes out looking the way you would expect it to look. For left to right text within a majority right to left document, it's exactly the same. You type it in logical order, it gets stored in logical order, the BIDI algorithm comes along, processes it, and writing from right to left, it puts stuff in the right order. What happens if we have right to left within left to right within right to left? Something like that. I was talking to a guy called Khaled Hosni, who's helping me with SILE, and he's very, very good on bidirectionality, and I said, you know, surely this is wrong, because what I wanted to write was the Aleph Gum conference, and it's done it in the wrong order. He said, actually, no, this is correct, because you've taken a chunk of left to right text, and then you've gone and switched back to right to left, and put that in right, and then you've got another chunk, conference, is the third chunk of text, which is put in the third place. There are ways around this. There are special markup you can use in Unicode to say, no, actually, I want this whole thing to be a left to right embedded segment. So that looks like a bug, but it unfortunately is not actually a bug. When you get into directionality, you get some interesting things happening. We talked about Mongolian yesterday. Mongolian traditionally is a top to bottom, left to right system. It's sometimes written horizontally. And when I was thinking about Mongolian, I basically decided SILE previously had this idea of x coordinates and y coordinates. And he moved along the x coordinate, he moved along the y coordinate. And when we got into mixing directionality, I thought this is just not going to fly out. A couple of weeks ago, I just ripped the whole thing out. And now you have a writing direction coordinate and a page advance direction coordinate. And you can tell SILE to set that the writing direction is top to bottom and the page advance is left to right. And it is completely agnostic about how that works on the frame. All you need to do is add one command to say, this is the direction of this particular text frame, and it goes and does the right thing for you. I don't know how you would typeset vertical Mongolian if you weren't using SILE. I'm sure there must be a way. I'm sure there must be a way. But it's a fairly unique writing system. I've mentioned frames, and we talked about frames there. One of the drawbacks of tech is that it doesn't have much of a sense of layout. And so when I was writing SILE, I decided I needed to get this right. And I introduced the concept of a frame. A frame is just an abstraction of where SILE writes text on a page. And it's defined, usually it's defined in the document class, but you can define it in SILE. And frames are defined relative to each other. So here I'm saying I've got a 200-point width sidebar, and it starts just a little bit after the right column, and it ends at the right of the right title. So you can, and it will work out what that means in terms of coordinates. Normally that's defined by the document class. There isn't a GUI to SILE. There's no way you can quickly drag these frames onto a page, I'm afraid. Yet. But you can do things like have multiple masters. You can reflect the masters and do mirrored output. You can change the layout of the frames on the page on a per-page basis. So those are frames. And when I started messing with Mongolian, I thought, what would happen if I just put some Latin text at the beginning and say, now lay this out as if it were Mongolian? And I was quite pleasantly surprised to find that it did that. Which, I don't know the conventions for mixing Latin and Mongolian, but I presume it would be something like this.
Yeah.
Yay! I do know the conventions for Latin and Japanese. Japanese is an interesting one because there are 3 separate ways you can lay out Latin text within vertical Japanese. You can simply use full-width glyphs, like here. You can rotate the glyphs, as you've seen here, or you can have half-width glyphs, like that. And again, I have a Japanese package which gives you commands to do each of those styles. Because SILE is written in what we call an interpreted programming language, what that means for you guys is that you can rip out components of it and replace them. To do grid typesetting, for instance, it's very easy. SILE has a function which computes the leading between 2 lines. So you just rip that function out and say, okay, give me the leading, but make sure that it's quantized to these specific values of the grid. And similarly for Japanese, it turns out that rather than using the standard line breaking algorithm, it uses TEP's best fit algorithm, which looks at an entire paragraph at a time and tries to find the best breaks in there. Actually, you can use a much simpler line breaking algorithm for vertical Japanese. So you can rip out the line breaking algorithm and put another one in as you go along. Just again, as a crazy experiment, I thought, what would happen if I have right to left text within vertical, within Latin, within a vertical. I don't even know if there's a convention here. But this is what SILE does, and I don't know, maybe it's right. I want to show you a few more examples. This is the kind of thing that you can do with frames. We've seen that already. Somebody fairly early on asked me if we can typeset Tibetan pechas, the sacred text in SILE, and yeah, looks like you can. And in keeping with the idea of being designed for Bible typesetting, I was very keen to make sure that parallel and synchronized text work. So here's a parallel, Greek, English, and Japanese working together. So I've given you a very optimistic presentation of SILE and all the things that it does well. One of the things that don't quite work well, line breaks in bidirectional text, fixed that one yesterday morning. Insertions and footnotes have been a continual pain for me. I think they work most of the time, which is not good enough for typesetting systems. I'm not quite sure what the problem is there. At the moment, I guess if you used tech, then what you've actually used is LaTeX or something like that. You used a set of packages, scripts on top of tech. You haven't, in general, used the raw system itself. Tech has had the benefit of 30-odd years of people writing third-party scripts, writing book designs for it, writing packages. And so the very low-level system, nobody uses anymore. SILE has not yet had that benefit. So it's still quite low-level in a lot of ways. This is why I need people like you to play with it and kick at the tires and say, hey, it'd be great if it did this. And hopefully even write some of that yourself. And again, finally, I don't know what else doesn't work. Because it needs seriously kicking about. So how can you do that? How can you test it out? The homepage there, siletypesetting.org. I suspect that one or two of you use Macs. If you do, install Homebrew. And then if you do that, you can do brew install SILE, and it's right there. In the software industry, we talk a lot about test-driven development. The idea is you write out a set of tests that you would like your software to conform to, and then you plug away at it until those tests pass. There's another school of thought called conference-driven development, where you write a set of slides for a conference which describes what your software should do, and then you work like hell before the deadline. So some of the things that I've talked about in this talk are only available in the very, very latest development version of SILE, which you can get by adding --head to the end of that command. The next thing you need to do is read the manual. You will not pick this up just by tinkering with it. You can have a look at the examples, but to get anywhere with it, you will not need to read the manual. It is not a simple system. I want to leave with a challenge from you to me, that if you are working with any kind of unusual script that is in Unicode, and that you have some nice fonts for with OpenType features, that SILE does not support, come and talk to me afterwards, buy me a coffee, explain to me the conventions of your script, and during this conference we will get it implemented and we'll do a demo tomorrow morning. Okay? Thank you very much.